All right. Okay, guys, Pashat, when I went to Tosfos, when I went back, I skipped a few lines, so we're gonna make up the few lines right now, and then we're gonna, God willing, learn Daf Samach Dalet. All right. So back to Samach Gimel, 9 lines from the top of the Amid, continuing to make this correlation between that a Talmud should not render halachic rulings in the life of his Rebbe. Similarly, the concept of showing a knife to a Chacham was done mitnei chvoidei shel Chacham. So certainly in the locale of your Rebbe, you should not be looking yourself at such a knife. However, Rabbi gives an exception. Amar Rava tzurba min Rabbanan, that a person who is a Talmud Chacham, literally meaning he's a young student, a yeshiva bacher, chazal nafshe, is allowed to inspect a knife, the chalif, if he's shechting it for himself, even though he's in the locale, even though he's with his Rebbe. It's befanav of the Rebbe. And on that says the Gemara the following, that Ravina ikla l'machayza. And I say, ushbechizne sakina v'kamachvale. Ravina was staying in it in. So his host, who was going to shecht meat for Ravina, even though there was a greater chacham there in that locale, at least maybe Ravashi was in that locale, he showed the knife to Ravina. Why? Because he felt that since the meat is being slaughtered for Ravina, it's based on Rava's ruling. Nevertheless, Amalei, the Rava was in the locale. So Amalei, so Ravina tells his host that Zil Amti Rava, go and bring the knife to Rava, give him the covet. So Amalei, so the innkeeper doesn't understand. He says Rava himself, Savar Mar Hoda Amar Rava, that Surba med Rabbanan Chazil and Afshe, and I'm shechting this animal for you. To which Amalei, Ravina responds, no. If I would be shechting the meat for myself, or even if you would be shechting the meat for me for free, in other words, you would be hosting me as a guest, then you're right. Rava himself will be the one that will allow me to check the knife myself. However, since I am buying the meat from you, in other words, it was like a hotel, I'm paying for my meal, that's different. In that case, the knife indeed must be shown to the local chacham mitnei kvoidei shel Rav, and here the Rav was Rava. And now the Gemara begins with an amanik, Simen, Zila, Lahanya, Machlev, Ika, V'Yakov, and beginning with the first, with the story that Rabbi Lazar Mahagronia and Rabbi Acha amends the Mesoiras Hashas Bar Tachlifa. These two chaverim, Ikla'u lebei Rav Acha bereid Ravika. There's a lot of Rav Achas here. They went to visit the home of Rav Acha bar Ravika, and that was Ba'asrei, the Rav Acha bar Yaakov, he was the local Rav. And Bo Rav Acha bereid Ravika, right, which was their host. Lemevad lahu igla tilsa, he wanted to prepare for them an igla tilsa. We have this igla tilsa many times throughout Shas, and it's good here, we'll learn the Rashi inside. The two meanings of igla tilsa. So have a look inside Rashi, around 17 lines from the top of the Amid. Either Godal Shlish, it's a calf that's a third of its size. And then Va'azhu Oimid Be'ikir Tam B'Sarai, and then it is its most tastiest, and he quotes here from Ava Mitzia. Umegadlin Oisen Achiyu Mishulashon. All right, V'yamanina Nami, that Moiser Shlish B'Scharcha, in other words, the concept of that Alma Orchei At Shlish, it's the best when it's up until the third, and Lish Nachrina says Rashi, that Shlishi Lebetin. Igla Tilsa means that when the calf is the third born to its mother, that calf is the tastiest. And on that, says Rashi, have a kasha on that lishnachina, the kashali, the ahadamer ba'alma. And he's quoting from Sanhedrin Daf Samachet, that Rab Chanina and Abu Oishia have a oski, the Sefer Yetziram, that they were experts in using Sefer Yetzirah. And they not only learned it, but as the Gemara says over there, every Erev Shabbos, Ibrilu Igla Tilsa, they created through using Sefer Yetzirah a Igla Tilsa. Now asks Rashi, Dahasa Mai Shlishi Lebetanika. Now you can answer that they created through Sefer Yetzirah an Igla, right, that tasted like an Igla Tilsa, but be that as it may, he wanted to prepare for them. He wanted to prepare for them an Igla Tilsa. And Isa Sakina v'Komach v'Lahu, so their host, Rav Acha B'Reid Rav Ika, went to show it to his two guests. So Amar Lahu, one of his guests, which is Rav Acha Bar Tachlifa, in the city there's an elder, like we mentioned, Rav Acha Bar Yaakov. And you have you should show the knife to him. So the other guest, not the host, not the Rav Acha B'Reid Rav Ika, but Amar Lahu Rav Elazar Mahagronium to Rav Acha Bar Tachlifa. I don't understand that Hachi Amar Rav Tzuma Midrabanan Chazi L'Nafshi. And over here, he was taka guest. He was not charging. So why do we have to show it to Rav Acha Bar Yaakov? And because of that, indeed, Chazi, he himself, in other words, Rabbi Elazar Mahagronium inspected the knife, and the Anish Rabbi Elazar Mahagronium, but he was indeed punished. The Gemara doesn't say what happened to him, but something happened to him. The Gemara asks, why would he be punished? So the Gemara gives Gavaldic answers, two answers. Number one, Shani Hassan, that since Rabbi Elazar's Chaver, Rav Acha Bar Tachlifa, the other guest, suggested that the Leichush Mar L'Sava, he suggested that the knife should be shown to Rav Acha Bar Yaakov. So since the Aschilo B'Chvaydai, once it's mentioned, you should take it to the Chacham of that lives over here, the Mara the Asr over here, even though that theoretically you did not have to do it, but once his name was mentioned, now you have to go all the way and show it to him. That Shani Rav Acha Bar Yaakov, since he was muflag, he was extraordinary, both b'shanim and b'chachma. And here, even l'nafshe, you have to show it. Even over here, you have to show it to the Rav. And now, Amar Rava, Ula Afrusha Meisura, another exception to this rule, where a Talmud is allowed to render a halachic ruling, even not only in the vicinity of his teacher, but mamish in front of his teacher, that I feel a fun of shaper dummy, that if the person is about to do something that's against halacha, and for whatever reason, the rabbi is not saying something, either it's not mamish in front of him, don't forget we learned Tosfos, it's 3 mil, you're in with 3 mil, but he's not there, or even if he's there, as we'll have in the next story. If the rabbi is not saying, then you have to render the halachic ruling, as we're going to continue with the story with Ravina. But just to point out the following, that when we learned yesterday, right, the Gemara Daf Samach Beis Amid Beis, 5 lines before the bottom of the Amid, right, that Rabbi Yaakov Bar Abba tells Abaye, Ki goy Megillas Tainis T'chsibo Manche Mayu Laroi Ba'asrei de Rabbi. So there, in other words, what's the kasha? In Megillas Tainis, we have days in which we may not fast. Now, if the person is already fasting on that day, then there's no shaila whether you can rule in front of your Rebbe or not, because lafrusha meisura, right? It must be that a person there in Samach Beis Amid Beis is asking the Talmud before the fast day, can I fast tomorrow? That's not lafrusha meisura. And that was the question to which, as we learned, that Rabbi Yosef tells him that afilu b'yosef v'chutcha is something that the Talmud also may not answer, even though everyone knows that you can have an egg in milk, ba'asrei the Rabbi. And now we're going to continue with the statement of Ravin. All right, guys, that made up for what we missed out on yesterday. And let us start now today's daf Samach Dalet. All right, very good. With the help of Hashem, we are learning ERUVIN daf Samach Dalet. But we are in the middle of the case where there is a guy who lived in a complex. He lived in a condominium complex. There were other Yidden, more than one Yid that lived there as well. He did not want to participate in the Schiras Rishus. Yesterday we learned the solution that Abaye gave. We also learned that Rava holds that solution is not valid. And now we're going to start learning the solution that Rava gives. Now what we will learn, when we're going to learn Rava, a Gavaldic concept, that a worker for the guy who's the owner here, he owns a house there, and therefore he has a part in the chutzner there. the Jewish worker is considered an extension of that goy enough that the Jew can now be mishtatev as every other Jew by participating, by giving bread for the Erev Chatzeros, for the Shituf Mava'os, and that will resolve the property or the ownership that the goy has in the Chatzar and in the Mavi. Well, it's the goy himself, like we learned, cannot be part of the Erev by giving bread. The goy himself cannot even remove himself through the instrument of Bitul Reshus. It has to be Schirus. That you're only dealing directly with the owner who is a non-Jew. But if there is a worker to this non-Jew, and the worker is Jewish, then the worker, as an extension of the goy, can participate. And when he participates by giving bread, then again, there's no issue over here, and that will be the solution that the Rava will find for that case. We're going to have a lot of Agadata in today's daf. We're going to learn. We learned some of what we're learning now. We had it not that long ago in brachas. But someone who drinks even only a reviz of yayin is Aliyah, may not render halachic rulings. We're speaking about someone who needs to render a halachic decision on something that's not written explicitly in the Chumash. Something is written in Torah Shabbat, then if it's that clear, just because you had a reviz of yayin, you're not rendering a halachic ruling. So we paskin the understanding and this concept of al yoida. But the moment it's a din that's not written explicitly in Torah Shabbat, that's already called yoida. You're paskining, you're rendering a decision, and if you are under the influence, you may not do so. We're going to learn the effect that drinking, that intoxication has on one's prayers, on tefillah. We're going to learn the difference between a shasui, someone who drank, versus someone who is now intoxicated, the shikr. Shasui versus a shikr. We're going to learn again a Gemara we had in Brachas Daf Lamed Aleph that lo yipater adam mechaveri ela metoich dvar halacha shemetoich kach zoichroi. It's almost verbatim to the lashon we take ahead in Brachas Lamed Aleph. There the lashon is that al yipater adam mechaveri shemetoich kach zoichreihu. But here it's similar. Actually, when we learn this daf, we're going to quote the Hayom Yom from Vav Iyur that explains the inner meaning of al yipater adam mechaveri ela metoich dvar halacha. And actually, the continuation of the Hayom Yom maybe is mamish connected to here Daf Samach Daled, because there are really two statements that the Rebbe writes after he explains the Hasidic types of Aliyah Pater Adam Echaveiroi to make him into a Mahalach, and they're going to be connected to the two statements we have over here in Daf Samach Daled, as we'll point out. Ulai maybe we're going to learn a Gavaldic concept that if a person gets money, receives money without any effort, whether it is, the Gemara gives a few examples, like a mitzvah, then there's a possibility that the onlookers, if they are aware of it, they're going to be astonished. Wow, look what happened. That person without effort made azayful money, and then the person might be subject to an ayin hara, and we're going to have an eitzah toiva, or different eitzahs, what one should do that will circumvent, that will protect the person from that potential ayin hara. We're going to go back to this drinking of wine, the various methods that are needed in order to dissipate intoxication. And during the sugya, we're going to quote the Gavaldic story. We're going to learn other things from that story, that there is a rule, and then there is a balance to the rule. The rule is that ein ma'avirin aloi cholen. We have this in Barachas. We're speaking specifically here about bread, that if you find bread laying on the ground, don't walk by it. Pick it up. We give kavod to that which sustains us. On the other hand, that's balanced, that when you live in an area where people practice kishuv, one of the regular ways of practicing kishuv was that they would somehow imbue that bread that they left purposefully with a zak kishuv spell, and if you were to take it, then you would become ensnared in that spell. And then you have to just leave it where you find it, don't touch it. So what do? On one hand, on the other hand, you don't want to be farchapt in anything connected to kishuv. And we'll see, again, the areas that the Gemara is suggesting, this man, ha-Talmud, depends in which locale you live, depends if the rave of people practice kishuv there, if people are chashad al kishuv, when should you go over echolin, and when should we apply the concept of ein ma'aviran al echolin? Very good. Let us start on Daf Samach Daled. Amud Aleph, 3 lines from the top of the Amud. Again, Rava refuted the solution that Abaya gave. right? Especially by saying achrasta l'dardike, gavaldik. So the Gemara says, Elo amarav, that what should you do? Leisel chad minaya, one of the people that live in this complex, one yid should likrav lei, should become buddy with a guy, should become friendly with him. And the lishol minei duchta, listen, he doesn't want to every week rent out his rights to the chutzner. He doesn't understand what that means. He's suspecting that they're trying to buy him out. He doesn't want. But as a chaver, if you're friendly with him and you tell him, do me a favor, allow me to use, so you have, every person who lives in this complex has rights in the chutzner. So let me use, as a favor, some of your rights to the chutzner. V'linach bei midei. Either it means, and this yid has to actually make use of it. Others understand that you have to get permission for you to be allowed b'reshusai to play something in his chutzner. The moment you have rights, he gave you the rights, even though you're not paying for it, to do something in his part of the chutzner. Now you become like eschiroi v'lekitoi. These are terms that we'll learn a lot in Bava Metzia. A sachir is someone who is hired in the whole year, right? You're his worker. A likitoi, not schiroi, is someone who gets hired when it comes to the season of picking, when it comes to the season of planting, a part-time worker. So you become like his full-time worker, like his part-time worker, and therefore what? No, it's you become a shtickle extension of the guy. How does that help? And that there is a rule that like we spoke in the introduction, yes, a guy cannot be mishtatev in the eruv, nor can the guy himself be mevatel his reshus. But if there is a Jew that is connected to the guy because he's his worker, and now we're making the link over here, the Jewish worker gives bread as part of the shituv mava'os. And there's no problem with the fact that the guy lives over here. He's a yid. He can participate with his own bread. This is exactly what we do right now. When we live in a complex and there's goyim that live there, so the designation of the matzah that we do, and we're zachin to every Jew that lives here, doesn't help for the goyim. So we go to the manager or to the superintendent and we give him a few dollars. I know we give him money, but the pshat is the manager is like representing, that's one way of looking at it. He's representing everyone that lives here, including the goyim. The manager works for the homeowners. He works for the goy. And now with the manager, if the manager is a goy, you got to give him money. According to this, if the manager is a Jew, no schirus is even needed. You get the manager to participate in the eruv. Now it's an interesting link. You know, when ERUVIN works for the goy, that's one type of representation of. Here we're saying a whole different word, that when they're chavedim to the point that the owner, the non-Jewish owner, gives ERUVIN, who lives here, reshus to use something of his, to use a part of his chutzner, that is like the din of schiroi and lekitoi. Gevaldik. Now that we introduced this concept of schiroi and lekitoi, now we have a question. If in this complex, you don't have one Jew that's a worker for the goy. You have 5 of them. Now, normally the rule is that every person who has his own house, he is mechoyev to give his own bread as part of the eruv chatzeret, as part of the shituv mavos. Here we're speaking about 5 people, right, that they are there working for the goy. They don't own anything. You're telling me that they now, since they're Yidden, if there would be only one, they can represent the goyish owner, and they should be mishtatev like every other Jew by giving bread. What happens if there's 5 of them? 5 is just an example. In other words, do we say that now each one of the 5 has to give bread? Or no? Why would you need that? Each one of the 5 will have the right to represent the goy in the shituf by giving bread only from him. Which one is it? Everyone has to give? Or no, only one of the 5 can give. So Amalei Rabbi Yosef tells the student that this whole thing was a kula. Don't make it into a chumrah. No, we don't need from every single schira lekitoi, even though they're living there in his property. Any one of them can resolve the ownership of the goy. Again, by the way, if there's schira lekitoi, you can still do schiras reshus. It's still an option. But now you have the additional option of getting one of the workers to participate like a Jew participates by giving bread. Says the Gemara Gufam, Right, we're going to call this statement number 1, that we're quoting in the name of Shmuel, that you don't need to have a schirus reshus. Amar Rav Nachman, wow, kama mal yoshmaitza. This makes so much sense. How great is this statement? Now we're going to learn a whole topic over here. Can a person make such an expression if he is implying that there is another statement that's not so great? Now, if everything you learn is great, of course you can say, wow, today is amazing. Today the Maimon is gavaldik, the Sikh is Daf is gavaldik, nothing wrong with that, even according to the Marsha, as we'll speak out. But when you hear two statements, especially here it's in the same name, and you like one, and for whatever reason you don't understand the other. So when you say, wow, this is great, and the other one is not so great, that's already not respectful. The next statement that he heard was, oh, Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Now we're going to go into this whole topic that we're going to run a lot with this. That's shas revius yayin, that if a person drank only a revius of wine. Now there is a big discussion over here. The Marsha brings it up. Are we speaking about pure wine? Like we keep on learning in the times of Chazal, wine needed to be watered down. And obviously concentrated wine is a lot more intoxicating. Or are we speaking about watered down wine? But whichever one it is, if you have a revius, al yoida. And on that, I don't like this statement. You know why? He says, because before I drink a revius of wine, my mind is not clear. How great is that? Some people might even call him So now we'll hold on. So first of all, I mean, the Marsha is the one that's dealing halachically. How can you do that? So he differentiates between pure wine that is usur versus not pure wine. But nevertheless, if he needed some wine to have a clear mind, he didn't like the statement that if you drink a revius of yain, the way it sounds, maybe because it's not differentiating, al yoida, I don't like that statement. Now, the Gemara is not going to be commenting whether the content over here. The Gemara now is going to be commenting. Rav is going to be telling Rav Nachman that you're not allowed to give this expression. Amalei Rava, my tama, Amar Marhacha. Amar Marhacha, again, now we're not speaking about the Teuchen, we're speaking here about such a statement, oh, this is good, and that's not good. Amar Rav Acha Bar Chanina, what's the meaning of the pasuk in Mishlei that V'roya zoynois ya'abed hoin? Literally it means, the word roya means a shepherd, the word roya is from reus. That if a person, God forbid, befriends a zoina, befriending a zoina is the segula to lose all your wealth. Okay, that's the pshat. What's the drush over here? Zakta like this, that the words zoina is really a composite of the words zuna'eh. When a person is learning Torah, he says, this is so nice. And I like Rav Nachman, and this is not nice. Or he implies this is nice, and the other ones are not so gavaldik. This ruling is gavaldik. But you know what happens? Ma'abed hoina shel Torah. Ma'abed here means that he loses. He forgets his learning. Why does he forget his learning? Because he's not machabed the learning. Be'emes, forgetfulness is part of human nature. The reason why some people don't forget the learning, I'm not speaking about the people that were gifted with photographic memories. There are certain people that have average memories, but they never forget the learning. Because like we explained, Shikha, that Hasidus says, is only connected to the Achoraim of Torah. Chachma, you can forget. Oir, the Pnimius HaTorah, you never forget. If you see the light, you saw the light. So when a Yid sees the Pnimius of the Torah, then every word of Torah is godliness. They'll never say, not explicitly nor implicitly, this Shmuah is not known. The moment you begin to say, this is good and that is not as good, that means that you, me, we're only connecting to the Achoraim of the Torah. Because in Chachma, in Chachma, this is Taka Gavaldik, and that is not so Gavaldik on the level of Chachma. If you are only connected to the level of Torah, then you're going to forget. You're going to be you're going to forget nothing, not lose your wealth, you're going to lose your Torah. Okay, because that's the word. The ein shikha lifnei chisei kivodecha. So teaches Hasidus that the moment you get to the chisei kivodecha part of Torah, on that level there's no shikha. And you know what? Beautiful. So Rav Nachman hears this and he says, Hadrubi, that's it. Ich tu tshuva. He never made such a statement again. Now, the Marsha says that you can't even say Shmuel Zuanah it wasn't only that he was being criticized for saying Shmuel zu einano. Right, other Achreinim say, no, that the only critique we made to Rav Nachman was when he said Shmuel zu einano. Even the Marsha, if a person learns, if every time you learn you say, this is so great, then there's nothing wrong with it. It's when you say this is great and you really mean and you imply this is great and others is not so great. We have to be very careful. Every part of Torah is Gavaldik. It's like every Yom Tov is the greatest Yom Tov. Every Halach is the greatest Halach. Every Maimed is the greatest Maimed. Okay. Says the Gemara weiter. So now that we mentioned the first statement of Hashoyse Yayin is Al Yoira, so now let's go into this whole topic. Omar Rabba Bar Rav Huna. Shasui Al Yispalo. The person is intoxicated, they're not allowed to daven. Now, if they did daven, is their davening, were they yoitzer? Depends. If they are on the level of a shasui, and we'll define soon what shasui means. Shasui is the lower level of intoxication. Kakem, I'm sorry, shasal yispalel, but the im yispalel trilas in tefillah. But if he davened, then he was yoitzer. But a shikir means someone who's more intoxicated. Not only al yispalel, but him yispalel tefillah so toy eva. His tefillah is a abomination. Have a look inside the treasures on the bottom of the Amid. Shikir al yispalel him yispalel tefillah so toy eva v'lo yotza. That's the meaning. Toy eva means it's an abomination. He's not yoitz because kivin. Okay, as the Gemara is going to explain soon. But that's a very important. Halacha l'mais. Now, how do you define the shikir? How do you define the shasi? So, hechadam yishazir l'm shikir. So, the Gemara says, ki ha. The Rav Abba bar shumni. The Rav Menashe bar Yimri mi gifti. Hava ka miftiri mi adodi abra dinahar yoifti. In brachas, it's amazing. I don't know the correlation, but in brachas, the flamad aleph, when we have a similar sugya, when two people are accompanying one the other, and they are about to say goodbye, and they establish this rule that when it's ideal that when two people say goodbye, they should share a halacha, they should share Torah one with the other. There, the Gemara also gives mamish specific locations where they were from, where they were walking, where they were departing. It's amazing, with all the prat. So here they came on the bridge of the city called, or on the river of Nahar Yoifti. So Amru, they said to each other, Kol chad minan lema milsa delishmi alachavri. Let each one of us share something with the other. And why? Because the Amar, Mari, Barafuna, here it's not Al, but it's Loi, Loi yipater adam mechaveroi ele metech dar alacha. And why? Shemetech kach zoichroi. That's the way one will remember the other. I just want to quote the words of the Hayom Yom of Vav Ir, and you're going to see this mamish is the inner of the whole flow of the Gemara over here. Here the Rebbe writes that what's pshat to share a dvar halacha. So says the Rebbe, Azat Torah was macht im der Herer for a mahalach. No, it's you are going. What gives a yid koyach to go? A journey, begashmias, is really reflecting a journey beruchnias. When we are on a journey, what's the gasoline? So begashmias, you have to eat, right? Today you put gas in the car. What gives it when a yid is on a ruchnias dika journey and we're journeying up, we're journeying forward, not God forbid the opposite. That, you know what gives me koyach to journey? Torah. So it has to be azat Torah, that this person will be so inspired. In other words, it's going to be given over in a way that it's going to become internalized by the listener. And now the listener is able to take it to the next level. He'll be able to go on a journey. It's going to make him for a mahalach. Now the Hayom Yom continues. I'm just going to read the Hayom Yom, and l'chudet mamish fits to both of the Torahs, what one told the other. There it says, Inyan ha'iluch hula alois midargo ladargo. That's the first statement in the Hayom Yom. Now let's read weiter in the Gemara. So Pasach Chad v'Amar heichidami shasui v'heichidami shikir shasui kol sheyachal ladaber lifnei hamelech. Even though you are intoxicated, you drank wine, but when you stand in front of the king, you can properly speak. While drinking takes away the koyach habina, which is why people have greater chachma, but they can't articulate. The words come from bina. People begin to slur. So as long as this person is still able to speak, he should not daven. But if he daven, that's the din. Tefillah say tefillah. Shikir is kol she'eni yachal ladaber lifnei hamelech. In other words, you stand in front of the king, but because of your intoxication, you're not speaking the way one should speak in front of a king. Because you can't, because you are intoxicated. That's where tefillah is toyeva. In other words, he told them a halacha that's connected to tefillah, and which is the lachayda, the inyan of going la'alois. What is tefillah? Tefillah is us. There's mitzvahs ben adam lachaveiroi. So we're going horizontal and we're going vertical. We're going up midarga ladarga. It's connected to a halacha in tefillah. Now the next statement in the Hayyim is ba'aliyah zu. That Aliyah zuhi beyoyser al yidei poyel tov ton ayidin atoiva begashmi is bechlal uberuchni is befrat. So the second statement has to do doing a favor between man and man, and especially beruchnius. So now let's look at the next statement. So pasach yomar that hamaslik benichsei hager, the only person that halachically might not have any halachic heirs is a convert, because Gershon is Gayer Kekot Shanelo Dami. Now, if a ger, after he becomes a ger, has children, of course they are his halachic heirs. But if a person converts and after his conversion, from then onwards, he has no children, even if his children converted with him that he already had, but halachically, each one is Kekot Shanelo Dami. So if such a ger passes away, his belongings become hefker because he has no halachic heirs. So if a person is now going to make a chazaka in the belongings of a convert, in other words, just like that, he'll become in possession of a windfall of money. Mayasu v'yiskaimu biyodoi. Let's put your finger in Rashi. Mayasu v'yiskaimu biyodoi. 5 lines from the bottom. These are the words of Rashi explaining the sugya that midi the temiyah he v'tavihi ba inshi. Anything that's amazing. And people are astounded. Wow, look at the mazel of that person. Just like that, all of a sudden he owns a new house. Which when people are very wealthy. But the observers, even though it's all from the Eibishter, but they say, he worked so hard, he became wealthy. There's not as much potential for ayin hara than when there is someone who with very little work, or basically with no work at all, he made a chazaka. He improved the land a little bit, he made a little hole in the land, he improved the lock. So what, all of a sudden he's in the possession of a $1 million house, or today in LA in a $10 million house. What a great concept. Now we're going to learn that Rashi also on Amid Beis. Rashi says it because there might be an ayin hara. But the bottom line is that when observers are astounded at someone's what they perceive to be easy money, there's a big possibility that the person easy come, easy go. And when you do a mitzvah, that preserves it. So what mitzvah should you do? Keep your finger inside the second to last line of Rashi. Let's go right to the Gemara. Yikach bohem sefer Torah. You should purchase with some of the money. That's what Rashi says. B'miktsasan, you'll buy a sefer Torah. Ubeschar elu yischaimu acherim biyod. Just read inside the Rashi. So that's answer number 1. Omar Rav Sheshes. Says Rav Sheshes, guys, return to Samach Dalad and Beis, that afilu, it doesn't only go to a machzik v'nichsei hager, which is mamish out of the blue. You have no idea that this get is going to pass away in many cases. But even if it is a husband inheriting his wife's possessions, here it's also is something that people are going to say, wow, look at the mazel of this person. Just like that, he became so wealthy, even though the halacha is right that a man is yerish v'nichsei ishtay. Now, interestingly, we're not mentioning a man being Yiddish from his parent. And there's many, first of all, maybe it's the same thing, but maybe you're one son from many sons. There's not that much windfall, or maybe it's something that people, that's the way of the world, that children inherit from their parents, that a husband should outlive his wife. So maybe, and statistically, maybe women outlive their husbands. At least that's the reality of many of us in our group over here. So let's go right there. So even over there, Epes Daf Mentana, here look inside the top Rashi. He adds these words that again, because the milsa the tavohu ba inshi namihi, because this is also a source of astonishment, and v'shaltabuhu eina bisha, and there might be an ayin hara. So also he says that the eight we had was buy a sefer Torah. Rava says afilu avad iska v'ravach. Even if a person did one business, no, it's when a person is a worker, you get paid per hour. Yeah, if you got paid a lot of money, that means you worked a lot of hours. The moment you are a business person, it's amazing the way God made the world. Same effort, same hours. Like one guy is selling tables, one guy is selling real estate. One guy is going to make $100, one guy is going to make $100 million. So there's a certain point where there is an appearance of, wow, look, for that little effort, all of a sudden he accumulated that much money. And Papa Amar afilu matzah mitziyah. What's the afilu? I don't know, but good. Afilu matzah mitziyah. Afilu matzah mitziyah to me would be the greatest timiyah, because you did mamish no work at all. But be that as it may, the eitzah until now was to buy a Sefer Torah. Now, just to be aware, even though Rashi wrote in Amud Aleph that you're not using all the money to buy a Sefer Torah, but a Sefer Torah, number one, is very expensive, and number two, a Sefer Torah benefits everyone. You read it for the whole tzibur. So says Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, afilu kosev v'hu tefillin. You can buy something that's not as expensive. You can buy something, we're not speaking about Mefsoim tefillin, we're speaking about private tefillin. You can be buying something that you're going to be benefiting yourself. Nevertheless, it's a mitzvah. And when you do, it's like when you do a mitzvah with some of the money, it protects all the rest of it. Okay. Now, for Amar Rab Chanan v'Temer Rab Chanina, my Qira'ah, where do we have such a source that doing a mitzvah will help you retain, be mekayim your physical possessions? I want to say by tefillin, by Sefer Torah and tefillin. That's the second part of the Hayom Yom. You're reading the Sefer Torah in public. That means you're doing a teva for your fellow, especially beruchnius. And maybe according to that, the tefillin means to go buy a pair of tefillin from Avsayim and give it to another yid. But coming back over here, Micro, it says in Chukas, when it says after Aaron HaKohen passed away. So it says, Vayishmak Nani Melech Arad Yoshev Banegev, Vayish V'menu Shevi. And we went and we attacked the Aradim, the Aradnikim, and we made a neder, Vayidar Yisrael neder. Now, it's just to be clear that our neder there was that if we're going to win the war, we're going to give all of our spoils to the Mishkan, to God. I know that. So and here the person is not using all the money to do a mitzvah. Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. The concept of there, the goal was not to retain the money. There, the goal was to be matzliach in waging battle. Matzliach means, as it says in the Chumash, not one yid got hurt. That's like a ness in a war. We had no casualties at all. Here, we're speaking lechatchila about the goal of retaining the finances. But the correlation is that just like we committed to do a mitzvah, u'b'schus the mitzvah of giving everything to God, we should be matzliach in the battle. Here also, if a person already has resources in their hands, and if they think that there might be an ayin hara, so doing a mitzvah, the mitzvah will mean, like he gave an example over here, just to point out that it's a Sefer Torah, something that's used for the public, or even a pair of tefillin. Again, I understand that when you buy a pair of tefillin, especially by us, you never keep the tefillin selfishly. There's no such a mitzias. The question is, how much mefsoim will you do with it? But you're doing something for your fellow Jew. And that's all coming back to the Hayom Yom, that you become a mahalach, that you go me'iloi achar iloi. The ultimate elevation is when a yid does a favor to his fellow beruchnis. All right. So now a person did drink, and we're saying that al yoyre. So what should you do? So Amar Rami Barabba. You should know like this. Number one, derech mil. And if you travel the distance of 1 mil is a 2,000 amas that we keep on learning about. Or not end, or v'sheino kolshu. If you sleep, it can be even the smallest snooze. That these two, one or the other, is mefikin asayayin. It in English, it dissipates, it weakens, it takes away the intoxication. Now, Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Abba bar Avua, lo yishanu. This statement of Rami bar Abba, elo sheshasa kedei revis, avol shasa yosim in revis. Not only will these two things not take away, what will not dissipate, Adarabba, they're going to make it worse. Kol shein. Number one, shederech toiradetoi. When a person is intoxicated, and we're speaking about traveling by walking, you're going to become even more shikir. You'll become more dizzy. And number two, the shena, sleeping, again, there's, how long, the Gemara is not saying, but certainly not a shena kolshu. We all know that when you drink a little bit under the influence, when you get up, after a little bit, you'll become even more confused. Is shena is mashakartoi. The sleep will make you more shaker. So it's only by the revis. Okay. So now asks the Gemara an amazing story. That how can we say again that how much travel do you need to do in order to be to dissipate the intoxication? Derech mil, Vatanya, v'derech mil matig ayayin vatanya, ma'aseh b'Rabban Gamliel, shehoya roichev ala chamoir, v'hoya mahalech ma'akoi to the place called Keziv, and v'hoya Rabbi Eloi mahalech achrov. And listen to this, we're going to learn so many dinim from this brisa. We're going to learn a total of 7 dinim, first 3 and then 4. Matzah geluskin baderech, they were walking by loaves of bread that were laying on the road, they were laying on the ground, Amaloi. So Rabban Gamliel told this Talmud that was accompanying him, that listen here, Eloi, first of all, toil geluskin min haderech, pick it up. We'll see soon why. Number 2, you presumed halachically that it's pasakum. You may not eat it. So just pick it up, but don't eat it. Then all of a sudden, a non-Jew was driving by the same highway, and Amar Lo Rabban Gamliel tells this non-Jew, first of all, he knew his name. His name was Mavgoi, or Mavgoi. Mavgoi, Toil Galuskin Halolo Eloi. Mavgoi, take these breads from Eloi. And indeed, and he gave him the breads. Now, Rabbi Eloi was very curious to know, Rabbi Gamliel knew him by his name. How did he know his name? So, Nitbal Loi Rabbi Eloi. After giving him the breads, he went after him. And Amar Eloi, just as Rabbi Eloi asked the Mavgoi, Mehechanato, maybe he lived in the same neighborhood. So he tells him, oh, Amar Eloi, Ma'ayore Shel Burganim. I live in that location where there's many huts. Akup. He lived in that shanty town area. He asks the non-Jew, so he responds that Mavgoi Shemeni, my name is Mavgoi. So he asks him, Klum hikircha Rabban Gamliel ma'olam. Did you ever meet him before? Amar lo lav. So says the Gemara, says the Brayso that Bois Shalom Adnu Shekiven Rabban Gamliel beruach hakodesh. Because without ruach hakodesh, how else will you know his name? You know that in Brazil we have a Gavaldi Karav, Rabbi Havlin. He's from one of the Havlin brothers. This Rabbi Havlin, did not go to Lubavitcher yeshivas, but they have the Lubavitcher family. And he relates, he's a Rav over there in a very chashuva Litvish koilul and community in Sao Paulo, that he went into Yechidus, I don't remember what year he shared, and he was one of the few people that he did not write his name down on a settle. And when the Rebbe looked at him, the Rebbe told him, I'm quoting what he shared on a Fabrengen over there, that in the previous generation, there were few that were able to do this. And the Rebbe looked at him, and the Rebbe wrote down his name and his mother's name, Baruch HaKodesh. That's a Yid. But anyways, we have a similar thing that when one has Ruach HaKodesh, they intuit the other person's name. Now, before we go on, this is part of the Brayso. Says the Brayso, Shloisha Devarim Lamadnu B'Ayso Shah. That we already learned 3 things from the story. Number 1, Lamadnu She'en Mavirin Alei Chalin. It was because of the kaveh that we should give for food. There was bread laying on the road. Don't walk by it. Pick it up. Number 2, that you follow the roiv of people that travel on the road. In other words, bread that was made by a non-Jew, was made privately by a non-Jew, is mamash asur midrabanan, pas akum, even if all the ingredients are kosher. Why didn't he keep the bread? Why didn't Rabbi Eloi keep the bread? Because they presumed it's pas akum. Now, there's a big novelty here, and this is a huge topic, just to touch upon it. Obviously, as they point out, that listen, to say that you don't need lamadnu from Rabban Gamliel, but it must be that this road was right nearby a Jewish settlement. The people that lived nearby were Ruban Yidden. Eloma, the majority of people that use the highway are not only the people that live nearby. The right people in the larger region were Goyim. So here the big question is, which roiv do you follow? Do you follow the roiv of the local inhabitants by saying it came from people that live, and then roiv Yisrael, you would go after that roiv? Or do you look at the highway itself? Roiv, oivrei derachim, you go after the roiv of people that use the highway. And roiv azoi, the roiv of people that use the highway were non-Jews. So therefore he paskined so implicitly that it's pas akum, and therefore you can't eat it. But now number 3. What's the number 3? V'lomadnu shechametzei shel nachri achar Pesach muter b'hana'ah. Right. Obviously, the story happened right after Pesach. Now that we paskin that it belonged to a goy, and it was a type. He felt the bread. It wasn't a day old. It was it was a week old. It was 2 weeks old. Whatever it was, he knew that this bread was be'en during Pesach. If the halacha would have been that chametz that even belongs to a goy, then one would not be allowed to gift it to a goy. Well, there's a cloud. When you give a gift, when a benefactor gifts a recipient, the recipient feels mechuyev, feels meshubet, he feels obligated. Right? That's called the toivas hana'ah that we have so many times in different areas in halacha. And that obligation, psychologically, that obligation is a benefit to the benefactor. So how would they be allowed to give a gift of this pas akum to another guy if it would have been asur bana? Again, that's the third limud that we have so far. Now we continue in the story. When they reached their destination, someone approached Rabbi Gamliel because he made a vow and he wanted the vow to be annulled. It's amazing. Even though we mentioned, so Rabbi Gamliel told to the one who's with him. Let me see, he told Rabbi Elyahu, they just drank wine, but Rabbi Gamliel did not know the amount. Did we just drink a revius of this Italian wine? So he said, yeah. So now that he drank a revius of yain, Rabbi Gamliel felt that he's not allowed to be annul a vow. So Amalai, once he heard Yehain, so you person who want for us to be matir your nether, travel with us. We have to walk it off. And how much did they travel? Now you see the kasha. Yeah, they traveled, not for 1 mil, for 3 million. Until they reached L'Suma Shel Sur. Then Yarad Ram Gamliel Merachamor, and as a judge has to put on a special judge garment, right? The reason why in many places Goyim put on, that white-haired sheitel, all of that they learn from us, that a judge has to be misatev before he judges, then misatev, v'yosha v'hiteres nidrei. Okay, so now the Braisa continues. Not the story. Now we'll learn something from the story. Just to be medayik, that before in the Braisa it says shloisha devarim. Now we're going to learn 4 things. The Braisa doesn't write 4 things. The Braisa writes the words harbe. Maybe that's a cloud. That's milsa agav urcha kamash malon. That the word a lot, right? Someone that speaks about a lot or many, these very generic big words. What is like the minimum of harbe? Maybe it's 4. But anyways, what's the harbe devarim? Number 1, lo madnu shiriviyas yaino italki mishakin. Again, it's mishakin enough. Don't forget, we know we can drink it via of yain. You might not call it bistashikir, but the type of clarity of mind that's needed to halachically render rulings, you don't have anymore. Number 2, l'madnu shikir al yoyra. Number 3, l'madnu shederach mafigas hayayin. And again, the detail, derech was 3 mil. And number 4, the l'madnu she'ein mefirin nedarim, not while you are riding, nor while you're walking, nor while you're standing. Because they were traveling. He got off. If he would have been allowed to be matir the nether while he's walking, not the reichav. Okay, he would get off the camel, he would get off his donkey, but he was going somewhere now. Even though he intended to go to chesiv, but now he's going further. Then he would have done it while we wouldn't have wasted a moment. And even if you can't walk, you have to stand. He wouldn't have sat down. The fact that he got off the donkey and he sat down, we're not focusing on the v'nis ateif, we're focusing on the v'yashav, is a raya that the only time you can be matir neder is, meifir neder is elo yoshev. Okay, so now that we finished the Braisa, at least Atkan, what's the point of all this? So Ktanimiyah shloisha milin, and not the 1 meal. Answers the Gemara. Answer number 1, shani yain o italki. Italian wine is the meshaker tvei. In other words, it's meshaker tvei, so you need to walk for more. Avol shasa yosem revius is kolchein derech toiradatoy and v'sheinoi mishakartoy, and that means that walking not only does not dissipate, it makes it worse. So if you're telling me that yain or talki, because of its strength, let's say it's mishaker tvei, so then drinking a revius of yain or talki should be equivalent to drinking, let's say, 2 revius of normal wine, of the wine that they had in the local wine. The moment it's more than the revius, then how will the walking at all resolve it? So the Gemara says, oh, you're right. Walking is terrible. But a rachuf shani. Rachav Shani, writing is different. So now we don't have to say that the Italian wine is better than the local Israeli wine. Why would we say that? Because Rachav Shani, if you're walking, you only had one revius. Italian wine is not Meshakin more than the local Eretz Yisrael Dika wine. The best wine in the world is Eretz Yisrael Dika wine, not the Italian wine. Alama, if you're walking, it's 1 mil. If you're riding, you need to have 3 mil. Okay. So now, let's go back to, you have to sit down when you make for a neder. Eini, Vamarav Nachman, Mefirin, Nedarim, Bein Mahalech, Bein Oimed, Bein Rochuf. You can even be riding. Rav Nachman, how can he say that? Rabbi Gamliel got off his donkey and he sat down. Says the Gemara Tanoi, and it has to be a Tanoi because Rav Nachman has to have another Tana to side with against the other Tana, Rabban Gamliel. The Ike Lamanda Omar, this is the Nekuda, this is the underlying Machlekes Tanoi, that Toischen Bacharata. When a person is coming in front of a Beis Din, there are 2 ways that you can get your neder annulled. Way number 1 is, like we do every Erev Rosh Hashanah, that's our minig, is that you stand up, the Beis Din Taka sits down, right? Our minig is you do it in front of 10, and all you do is you express that you don't want an neder. But here there's a shita that says that you have to have a reason why you regret. And if you, the one who wants the neder annulled, doesn't know a reason, Beis Din is allowed to help you with a reason. That's called Poischin Bacharata. They teach you how to make a Pesach, but a Pesach is needed. In other words, the moment it's not enough for the person who wants to get the neder annulled, just to declare, Beis Din, I want you to be Matan Neder. If all need is his declaration, his expression of I want it annulled, then you don't need to engage with your mind. Then you make the statement that you have to make, the mutalach, and you're good to go. But if you have to be Poischin B'charata, that means the Rav sometimes, if there has to be a reason, and many times the recipient of this Hataras Nadarim won't know the reason. So then the Beis Din, the Rav will have to give you the reason. For that you have to engage on a level that you have to sit down. Well, if you hold Poischin B'charata, you need to have more, let's say, concentration. And what is helpful for that is sitting down. The Ikalamanda Amar, which is the Tana, that Rav Nachman is relying on, that ain't Poischin B'charata, and therefore, if all you need is to make the declaration, mutalach, 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 you don't need your mind engaged, and for that, you don't need the benefit that you get for the mind when you sit down. The Amar Rabba Bar Khan Amar Rabbi Yechanan, my Pasach Le'Ram Gamliel Gavra. Okay, so after the 3 mil, it wasn't that Rabbi Gamliel just told him mutalach. No, you see details in the story that this person didn't know how to articulate a reason, a Pesach, why he wants his neder annulled. So Rabbi Gamliel, this is a unique thing normally of Beis Din, that Rabbanim cannot teach each side the reason for their side. But here there are no 2 sides. Here the Beis Din can be Poischin. And what did he tell him? He told him a Pasuk. Pasuk says that Yesh Boita, there's a person who is Mavad Bita Sifasayim. And your expression, right, your speech is Kimat Kirois Cherev. It's like a sword that pierces. That's how bad your speech is. And when there is such a speech, the Lashon Chachamim Arpe, even then, the words of the Chachamim can heal you for it. Now, what Kol HaBoita, what does that refer to? It refers to the general concept of making a neder. And we learned this, we're going to learn this, God willing, in Nedarim, that we're very careful not to make Nedarim. You know, the minute that many people continuously say Bli Neder, that's coming from these concepts. Because if a person makes a halachic neder, it's the end of the world if they violate it. So why would a person make a neder and put themselves in a position where they might be violating a neder? Kol HaBoita, here means any neder. Because a neder has to be articulated, it has to be spoken out. Kol HaBoita, even if he's going to fulfill the neder, is Roi L'Doikroi B'Cherev. He already earned the punishment of being pierced with a sword. Nor was then Elo Shaloshen Chachamim Arpe. If a person did make a neder, get it nullified. Don't say I'll fulfill it. Fulfill it, because hate, but it shouldn't be mitzad and neder. In other words, what did Rav Gamliel show him from this pasuk? That making a neder is sinful. That's enough of a Pesach. You don't have to give a specific reason for this neder. Now that I found out that it's so not good to make a neder, I want the neder nullified. Okay, and because of all that, he got off the donkey. Not only did he get off the donkey, but he sat down. Amar Mar, one of the original 3 dinim that we learned is ve'ein ma'avirin aloi cholon. Omar Rabbi Yechanan Mishum Rabban Shimon ben Yochai. This is connected again to the previous Atayah. That loy shanu elabadoyra sarishoinim. What was unique then? She'ein b'nois Yisrael perutzois b'chshafim. Now let's just also remember that the roiv of the oivrei derachim were goyim. So not only goyim they did kshafim, but Yidden did not. Avol badoyra so achroinim. When you suspect that this bread came from Yidden, since that in the later generations, even B'nois Yisrael Perutzais B'chshafim, Perutzais means that they engaged in it, they were open to it. So now, and this is something that we have in Bava Metzia Daf Chav Gimel, Dafke yes ma'avirim, walk by it, don't touch it. The words in Rashi in Bava Metzia Chav Gimel is that the people, they would infuse a spell in the bread. And the Rashi writes these words, lahachshil hadorsin alein. Literally, it's mashma that if you step on it, then somehow the spell gets you. Here we see, it doesn't only mean if you step on it. They did it to get you to step on it. But even if you won't step on the bread, but you're going to take the bread, the kishuv will have some sort of potential effect on you. And if you have to balance, once you have a chshad, that there might be kishuv imbued in this bread, then yeah, maviran aloi cholim. Says the Gemara Tana we learned. Another detail. That shleimin ma'avirim, because when people engaged in sorcery, in what type of bread would they imbue their spell? In whole loaves. But when it comes to shtikalach, bread, pieces of bread, even when you live in an area where people somehow put kishuv into the bread, they don't put it in pieces of bread. So we come back to the other cloud that ein mavirin alei cholim. Pesisin ein mavirin. It says in Yecheskel, the critique to the Jewish people at that time, that Hashem is saying that that we desecrated, right? I was desecrated. How? Either by engaging with handfuls of barley, or or by sharing pieces of bread. All of that was a critique that we were then engaging with sorcery, or we were giving money to the Oivdei Baal that they were machashvim. So we were machalol God, and we were so impressed by the kishuv, and they did kishuv both with this handful of barley, and they would do kishuv, that's the kasha, on pieces of bread. So you see that you would use even psisim of lechem for kishuv. So the Gemara says no. That the Nevi'ei Baal, it could be they did kishuv, and the critique is for us to engage with people being impressed by their kishuv, but we paid them with pieces of bread. We paid them with handfuls of barley. This pasuk is not describing with what they did the kishuv. If kishuv is being done somehow, if the spell is being put into bread, then again we stand the ground from the Braisa that only on shleimin and not on pesisim. Over there, the shakli bagrayim. Let's hop another few lines. Says the Gemara, Amar Rab Sheishes, Yishum Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah. Turning Charud Daf Samachay. That you should know that Yochel Ani lifted as Koil Oilam Kulim in Adin. Miyoim Shechara Beis Hamikdash Va'ad Achshav. Wow. And how is that? How can I absolve all the Yidden from their sins? Because it says, according to Pasuk in Yeshaya, Lachain, therefore, Shimi no Zois Aniyah. Listen now to this. Who should listen? Poor one. And those who are drunk but not from wine. In other words, he's speaking about the Jewish people that during the times of Galus, because of tzaris, we become like a drunk. We lose our minds. So the fact that you find in Yeshaya that he's calling all of the Jewish people Bisman HaGalus drunks, if we have a status of a shikr, then a shikr loses his or her freedom of choice. They're not that responsible for that which they do. So their first understanding was, so that in itself is a way to justify, of course, that if a person failed in a certain area, you can be matznik, you can say, well, because of the tzadas of the galus, we are like a shikr, and a shikr is not responsible. So the Gemara challenges the premise. A shikr is responsible for his or her deeds. It says in a Braisa that shikr, that even if a person is a shikr, he's not viewed as a person who lost his or her bina. If I don't have bina, I'll be called a shaita. Yeah, Shaita can have a lot of chachma. The problem is with the bina. Even though he did it while he's a drunk, clearly all the punishment. If a person, God forbid, violates something for which he's chayiv malchus, malkin oisli. Kloli shedavar hareyu kipikech l'chol dvarav elam shepater min atfila. Oh, as we learned above, even though a shasui b'di'evet, but even he should not daven, even a shasui. So the Gemara clarifies this statement. Indeed, that what did he mean? That Yecholani liftoir. Nami answers the Gemara midin tefillah, that the fact that throughout Golus, if there is a yid that's going to be told by God, you didn't daven properly, so for that's the excuse. What's the excuse is that we're in Golus, and the Yeshaya called us drunk from tzaris. We have a din of a shikr, and therefore we were unable to properly to have kavanah while we daven because we're in Golus. If davening should get better, so we can find out limud zchus, not for ourselves before the story, but you see another yid that's not davening well, understand that we're in Golus. And because of that, it's very difficult to have the right concentration as we stand in front of God in prayer, God willing, to be continued. Gavaldik. I got it. We're lucky, guys.
Thank you. Good night.
Yeah.